you want to hit record. It's saying preparing to live stream the meeting, and then I'll have to turn the volume down on YouTube once it does go live, because you know how YouTube is. It's so it's redirecting to YouTube now.
Looks like it says streaming live on YouTube. I didn't know you could stream straight from here to YouTube. That's cool.
Oh, we are. Yeah, you can. It's pretty cool. I just want to make sure I turn the volume down on YouTube, because otherwise we'll get a double, like a reverb effect, and it'll. So I muted the sound, and I'm just making sure I. So it says we are live then. Okay, yeah,
Yep.
there is someone watching. Okay, perfect. Okay, got it. Okay, guys, welcome back to the Typical Skeptic channel. I have a real treat for you guys tonight, and this is seriously someone who I consider like beyond Art Bell-esque type material. And when I say that, is someone who really comes with like real experience or stories with nostalgia, entertainment, thrilling, bone chilling. I mean, he adds culture to it with the New Orleans style. He's from New Orleans, so he adds that the French, the Creole, the African, the Hoodoo, the Voodoo. He mixes it all in, and he paints a very beautiful picture about paranormal occurrences in New Orleans. And who I'm talking about is none other than Dark Waters. And he started doing this back in 2000 and he started doing this back then 2015, and he was getting stories from people about around his town or around in New Orleans about paranormal happenings that would go on there. And he decided to start to, make a website about it. He talks about Bigfoot, Dogman, black-eyed kids, shadow peoples, ghosts. He's appeared on some of the biggest paranormal podcasts and radio shows around the world, including Coast to Coast, Beyond the Darkness Radio, Beyond the Edge Radio, Midnight in the Desert, and more. The way I found out about him was from the lovely Heather Wade, who I miss seeing I miss seeing her stuff, and I wish she was back on the radio, but I digress. Dark, thank you for coming on my show. How are you?
I'm doing good, Rob. How you doing, baby?
Good. Thank you for doing this. This is great, and it's great to be live on YouTube. What I wanted to ask you to start this off was like, how did you get an idea to do this? I mean, were you always a fan of the paranormal, and then once you got the idea to do it, like, how did you add so much flair to your stories? They're just like, they're like magical. They all have so much like like, I mean, I know it's the experiencer speaking too, but we could talk about that. But sorry, I'll ask you this first. What got you into it?
It's a bit complicated. So storytelling itself, I've always been a storyteller. That's a God-given gift. I would hang out with friends and go drinking, and typically we would find ourselves in a room with 20 people, 15 bottles of some kind of expensive champagne or wine. And around the room, people would tell stories. So it would be a story about some girl that a guy met in Amsterdam at a whorehouse, or it would be a story about when somebody went to Cuba and did something crazy, or a story about like when I went to Florida and ended up being trapped in the elevator with two stinky old people, just crazy stuff like that, right? So we would sit around and entertain ourselves by telling stories. I just so happen to be the best storyteller from the group of my friends, which are phenomenal storytellers themselves from real life experience. Then I hit this real bad period in my life where I go through a divorce, lose a whole bunch of assets. And I'm sitting there and I'm saying to myself, man, I need to figure out a way to generate another income. And I need to find something to pull me out of kind of like the funk and the rut of what I was dealing with. And so I started watching stuff on YouTube, and I heard some of the creepypasta storytellers. And I don't forget, I was sitting on my porch on 2706 Robert Street, smoking a cigar with my friend Corey Williams. And we would listen to a story. I was like, yo, these dudes whack. I could do better than them. He was like, bro, I've heard you tell stories, bro, about going to the bathroom. That's better than this. You should do it. So I decided to start doing it. But I wanted to deal in the paranormal because from a child, I've always had paranormal experiences. I never put a whole bunch of stock in them as a kid, but I mean, I've seen crazy stuff. I even had anybody who's listened to me for a long time knows about my grandmother and her hoodoo practicing and what happened to me when I was 12 going on 13 years old. And so outside of that, I had things where I was in the woods and pretty much in the swamps in New Orleans, and would walk into these cold spots, hear voices. There were times where we would build skateboard ramps in the woods and things would throw rocks at us, and other times we would see things. It was just crazy. All kind of stuff would happen. And so I decided I was going to tell paranormal stories. The problem I ran into was I'm listening to what people were doing when I first started, and it was whack because it was creepypasta. It takes a special skill to sit there and write a story as an author, as a creepypasta author. I said, I just want to tell real stories. And I have an extensive network of friends. So I started reaching out to all my friends. Hey, man, you ever had anything freaky or weird happen to you? And they started flooding me, flooding me with stories of things that happened to them. Girls talking about um, from stuff. My early content is like robotic voices because I was just testing it out. But that's some of the rawest paranormal and just real life storytelling there is. Girls who fought off rapists, girls who were raped, guys who had people come in their house in the middle of the night, people who had guns pulled on them, all that kind of stuff. And I was testing the content to see what people would like. And then I settled in on cryptids and started doing cryptid stuff. And then just
so I mean, I was gonna say, when did you realize that New Orleans was special? Because here's my outlook on it. I'm as a guy from Pittsburgh that listens to your stuff, and I've always had a fascination with your city. I've always loved it. I've always seen the lore, and I even watched the episode. There's the season of it was called the one with there was that's on every year about American Horror Story, where they did the one about the coven, and the coven of witches was in New Orleans of all places. And I was like, wow, there's just so much magic to your city. Did that come on real fast? Did you already always know that?
Well, everybody down here knows. Everybody down here knows that New Orleans is a place full of magic. So, like Hollywood and TV shows, they glorify things like the Loren House and Hoodoo and Voodoo from like a Hollywood perspective. But the real magic of New Orleans is not that. That's here. The magic that happens in New Orleans actually is where you have people who are in their houses practicing hoodoo and voodoo. So it's not so much like they portray it. For example, there's a couple of really high voodoo practitioners and hoodoo practitioners here, but one of the biggest hoodoo practitioners, he was a voodoo practitioner, the chief voodoo priest down here. That guy didn't have a place, but he would go in a graveyard and do rituals and do all kind of stuff. Everybody knew about him. He was a martial artist. I mean, he was really high up in there in the whole hoodoo gang and the voodoo gang. So it's one of those things where, in order to understand New Orleans, and understand magic, in order to understand spiritual warfare, and in order to understand any of that, people have to understand what dominion is and the spirits that have dominion in New Orleans, and the people who worship the spirits that have dominion in New Orleans, how those spirits got dominion and things of that nature. And people don't understand that.
I don't understand that. What's that mean? If you don't mind me asking, I'd love to. And does this have to go deal with spiritual warfare?
Oh, this is the basics of all spiritual warfare, and it's the basics of all magic. It's the basics of everything. So basically, dominion is what God gave to man in the book of Genesis. In Genesis 1, I think 26 through 28, if you go read, you'll see where God created man and woman, and he gave them dominion over the earth and all the creepy things and the fowls of the air, and told them be fruitful and multiply, right? So if you understand what dominion is, that man, me and you as human beings have dominion over everything on this planet, then you can truly get to understand what happens in spiritual warfare, magic, and spirit work, right? So every spirit that's in every realm, they have to function in this planet through a person. So for example, we've all seen the videos where there's these rappers, and it's the easiest thing is to say rappers. They're like, I sold my soul to the devil, right? Or I did a deal with the devil. Yeah, they did do a deal with the devil because they needed a spirit to work with them in order to get their success. And they made a sacrifice and they got the success they wanted and they got the deal that they wanted. So people have options. And if you have anybody who's in your audience that knows about magic, they'll know I'm telling the truth. They can work with a specific spirit, a spirit of the Orisha, or in my case, I'm a Christian. I work with God's spirit, the Holy Spirit. So you can choose whatever spirit you decide to work with. And but all spirits have to function on this planet through a person. And so when you understand that, then you understand dominion and you understand what true spiritual warfare is. And so now let's circle back to New Orleans, the things that go on in New Orleans. For example, let's take the rituals that we do in New Orleans that most people don't understand. Like every year we have Mardi Gras, right? If you were to take a moment and go research the names of the crews of Mardi Gras, Comus, Momus, Rex, Zulu, if you go back and really research those things, they're all based on spirits. And so what New Orleans does as a community every year is the whole city and everybody from around the country comes down and they participate in a gigantic ritual. They don't know they're participating in a gigantic ritual, but they're participating in a gigantic ritual. Therefore, those spirits have dominion over this city. And you can see it in our city by the way the city is. If you ever been to New Orleans, you'll anybody who's ever come to New Orleans, they'll say, man, I love going to New Orleans. I go down to Bourbon Street, I get drunk, I do this, I do that, I have fun, blah, 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 blah. All my inhibitions are gone. I just have so much fun when I'm in New Orleans. They don't understand from a spiritual perspective what's going on when you come here. So you'll have a woman who's been married to her husband for 20 years, never did anything wrong, come to New Orleans, cheat on her husband, right? You have a man who's been married to his wife for 3 months, brand new marriage, come down here, wild out, go to strip clubs, do all kind of other stuff. Because spiritually, there's things that have dominion here. And if you don't know what you're walking into, you walk into those things. So that's the basics of it. So when we start talking about, that's the city. When we start talking about the attitude of the people in the city, if you listen to our jazz music, now our second line music, there's songs that say, don't start no stuff, won't be no stuff. Don't start no stuff, won't be no stuff. That's second line music. Let's go get them. All kinds of songs. And if you're listening to me right now, when you get a chance, go listen.
What about the old songs that go, the one that went, my grandma and your grandma
sitting by the bayou.
Is that like a paranormal? Does that have paranormal intentions? Is that voodoo type of, or because they used it in a movie and I think they tried to make it like it was. You know what I mean?
No.
I think.
So it's really my flag boy and your flag boy are sitting by the bayou. My flag boy told your flag boy, I'm gonna set your flag on fire. Talking about Ina, Ika, Ika, Wane. So basically the Mardi Gras Indian crews down here, right? Which this is another thing people have to understand about. Then when I say spirits that have dominion in New Orleans, right? Because there was huge cultural melting pot, Africans, Europeans, Native Americans, everybody marrying each other, everybody with their different religious beliefs. You have Black people down here who are real Native American bloodlines, right? When you start talking about flag boys, spy boys, things of the nature that they talk about in that song, they are literally talking about things from Native American culture. When those tribes went to war, they had a boy who carried the flag. They had a spy boy who went out and spied on the other tribes. Then they had the big chiefs. So if you watch the second lines, real second lines in Mardi Gras, like real, not Mardi Gras, real New Orleans second lines, where they come out in the streets, you'll see these guys in these huge feathery outfits. And it's big chief from uptown, and there's big chief from downtown, big chief from back of town, front of town. They will march across the city and meet each other and literally open up these huge feathery, they look like big old peacocks. It's beautiful, bro. It's really beautiful, but it's paying homage to their old Native American traditions and the Native American traditions in their bloodline. Now, here's where a lot of the violence in New Orleans come from, and people don't understand this. Because there was so much bloodshed in this city amongst Native Americans, the slave trade, all this other stuff, our streets are soaked with blood. And so the violence is inherent in this city. It's one of those things where it's like, no. This city is violent. Even when the city was devoid of people after Katrina, when I was here working, there was still murders going on. It was ridiculous. It was people coming from out of town, murdering each other because the city has a spirit of violence on it, right? So That's why you see New Orleans the way it is. Now, most people look at New Orleans and they think of it as just a good time city. But if you really want to talk about what happens here, you have to understand when you visit this place what you're walking into. There are people who I know who live here who say, James, you know, or they moved out of the city. They'll say, James, I have to drive to the city for work. And when I cross the line that leads me into Orleans Parish, which is New Orleans is Orleans Parish, it feels different than where I came from. And I tell them, yeah, it is different because there's a different spirit that rests in this city than Slidell or Covington or Mandeville or La Plaza or Baton Rouge. And it's palpable. You can feel it. When you're here, you're on edge. You're paying attention. Like you know that something can pop off at any point in time. And so that really stems from the spirits that operate in the city. If you look at what goes on around here, man, think about it. I told you earlier that spirits work through people, right? Now, there's people who go out and they make deals with spirits. So those are the ball players, the rappers who say, you know, I'm going to go make a deal with this spirit and I'm going to ask for this amount of money, blah, blah, blah. We see it all over Instagram right now, right? Then there's the average person, bro, who has no clue, right? They're just running around, living their life, and they're doing things, and they end up engaging in activities that invite spirits in. So you'll have them do anything from, you know, the people who just have evil thoughts. They'll be like sexual and immoral, like playing around doing like sex toys, sex toy parties, running around doing crazy stuff. There'll be thieves, there'll be murderers, which our city is full of murderers. All the sins that you can think of: adultery, fornication, greed, wickedness, like anything that you can think of, lewdness. For example, people come to New Orleans every year, right? And they have this huge weekend. I forgot the name of it. Decadence Festival. I don't know if you ever heard of that.
No.
Have you ever heard? Okay. So every year there's Decadence Festival in New Orleans. And you go down to the French Quarters during Decadence Festival, and it's pure lewd activity. It's just people walking around with their penises out, their breasts out. I mean, just in the street, because that's a part of the spirituality of this city. It's a part of the spirit that rules this city. And so you see these things. And what happens for the average person who is not spiritually aware, they end up going out and they're just doing stuff, right? And then their behavior attracts a spirit. Tell you a quick story. One of the guys I work with here on YouTube, he had to move in with his brother-in-law. Check this out. This is how crazy it is. So his nephew's there, and they're talking, and he calls me. He's like, yo, man, you know, we had a rack of ribs we bought from the store, and the whole rack of ribs is missing. So a rack of ribs go missing one day. The next day, his cell phone goes missing. The next day, some money goes missing. So they all realize it's the nephew doing the stealing. So they start hiding stuff from the nephew because they know he's stealing. So he takes a computer, puts it under the mattress, right? Actually, not under the mattress. He puts it between the box spring and the headboard, right? So it's tucked between the box spring and the headboard, which, bro, you're not supposed to be able to find that, right? Well, he leaves, comes back, his computer's gone. And we talk, and he said, yo, man, how in the hell does this kid know where my computer is? And I said, because he has a spirit of theft on him. And he was like, I don't understand that. I said, let me explain to you. So when you go out, when you go out and you go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying that's so interesting that the spirits work through people like that. Like, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's all good. That's how it works. So if you go steal something one time, right? Let's say me and you, we go to the grocery store, and you know how they have the little candies at the store where you can stick your hand in there and get a candy. You're supposed to scoop it in the bucket. So let's say you and I go in there one day and we steal a candy and we eat it, right? We decided we was going to steal that. Now, every day you and I go to the same store, and every day we steal a candy, right? And then the next day, instead of stealing the candy, we steal a candy bar. But we're making these decisions. At some point in time, our activity of theft, us continuing to steal, sends a signal out saying, hey, any spirit that loves thievery, I'm stealing. And guess what? Because you opened yourself up to that spirit comes. Next thing you know, you start stealing and don't know why you're stealing. People experience it. A better example that people will understand is alcohol, right? So you're drinking. Every alcoholic starts off by taking one drink, right? Then they take another drink. Then they take another drink. And they get to a point to where they can't control and they can't stop drinking. Why does that happen? I'll tell you why. Because at some point in time, you've been given over to the spirit of alcoholism. And so now you just drink. Them people don't even want to drink. They don't want to be drunk. They don't like what's going on in their life. They don't like how it's affecting their family, but they can't help themselves. And how do they get fixed? They go to Alcoholics Anonymous and they get a coin and they commit to not drinking anymore. Not one sip of alcohol can they take. And they have to have a partner with them that says, okay, bro, they'll call, hey man, 2:00 in the morning, man, I'm thinking about having a drink. I want to have a drink. And the partner's like, no, don't take a drink. I'm coming over there with you. We're going to get some coffee. I'm going to keep you off this horse. You're not going to drink. That's because they're turned over to that spirit of alcoholism. And so that's how it works. People get turned.
Question.
Yeah.
What would you say that like also people could have a working put on them? And I know you talk about this a lot. I think they call it a working, right? When someone puts magic on someone that's causing them to display those behaviors. Could be voodoo, hoodoo, and I'd love for you to also get into the difference between voodoo and hoodoo. But could this be someone's got a working put on them, which causes them to behave a certain way as well?
Yeah. You can have a working put on. It's a hex. Yeah, you can have someone hex you, but it's a little more complicated than just someone putting a working on you. So, all right, we already established in our conversation, right, that every spirit works through people, right? So let's take the hexer, the person that's putting the hex on the person, and then the person that's being hexed. These are two different individuals, right? What does it take to put a hex on a person, and what does that mean? Most people don't understand what it means, right? Most people, the person who's putting the hex on a person, they have a very specific understanding of the spiritual realm. They understand that everything works through a spirit. They also, and anybody who really practices hoodoo or voodoo, they'll tell you this. They understand that the spirit that they're working with goes and launches a petition in heaven against that person that they're trying to hex, right? So it goes up, literally leaves, goes to the courts of heaven and say, hey, Rob and Dog Waters over here talking bad about people and they wronged me. And according to spiritual laws, which those spiritual laws are in the Bible, according to spiritual laws, I petition to hex them and do this to them, right? So that's the initiation, the petition of the hex. On the back end, you and I just going through our lives, but we have no clue about how real spiritual warfare works and how spirits work. So we just going through our life, handling our business. Let's say you and I go to a strip club and we see some nice girls and I'm like, yo, we're going to take these broads back to the hotel. We're going to smash. Let's do it. We do that every night. We just racking up all these sins and all these wrongdoings and all these wrongs. Well, guess what? When that hex is launched, that is a petition, and it's petitioning based on your activity in life. So based on the sins you did, based on what you did wrong, based on what happened, it said, no, I want to curse him because he did this. And so guess what? People don't understand this part. God, the God says, because he's a judge, the God says, okay. And that's how you get hexed. Literally, that's how you get hexed. Oh. The God of all gods, the most high God, and I'm talking about Jesus Christ. Some people call him Jehovah Nisi, Jehovah Shammah, Jehovah Shalom. That God, the judge, Jehovah El Mishpat, is sitting in court while these petitions are launched. And because his word stands and his rules stand, he says, okay, you can touch that person in that area of their life. And then bam, that person's hexed. That's how it works. So yes, that can happen to a person, and it happens to people all the time.
And it's more prevalent down there. Like people put workings on each other down there a lot, right? And they even put workings on long distance people, right? And let me ask you this: does the rule of witchcraft, where if you do something like a wrongdoing to someone, if you hex someone, does it really come back on you times 10?
Yes. There's a couple of things, like a hex or a curse without a cause is not going to stick if the person knows what to do to get it off of them. But if that person has wronged another person, like the person who was hexed, casting a hex has been wrong, they got a valid case, right? And then the come back on you 10 times part, that really works based on the person who's being hexed either repenting. If they're a Christian, repenting and coming to Christ and pleading the blood of Jesus. If there's someone who practiced magic, sending another spirit to go argue with that spirit in the courts. and petition for their own safety and their own well-being. And those are the two ways it gets resolved. Some people call it cleansings, and some people do cleansings of their bodies and themselves to make sure that they can return things. So yes, that definitely works that way. As far as to, I forgot, what was the other question you asked after that?
Well, I can't remember what I was saying going with that. We were talking about hexing, and well, let me ask you this. I'll switch this topic. What's the difference between hoodoo and voodoo? Because I've always been interested. Is it basically the same thing, or is hoodoo a little bit different?
Um, when you start talking about hoodoo and voodoo, they're both beliefs from the same region of the world. One of them is more of um, one of them is more of the worship of old ancient African spirits. Some people call it the Orishas, the seven powers. That a lot of that goes into voodoo. When you start going into hoodoo, hoodoo is a bit more complicated. If you talk to real hoodoo practitioners, or if you talk to anybody who knows anything about hoodoo, they say hoodoo is extremely deadly and extremely dangerous because hoodoo practitioners, most hoodoo practitioners proclaim to be Christians, and they actually use what's called hoodoo Bible magic, which is basically the Psalms of the Bible against their enemies. So the difference on a surface level, because there's these deeper levels and differences that because I haven't practiced them, I don't want to even try and go into those deeper levels. But on a surface level, that's more of a difference. And then when you start dealing with hoodoo, you're really dealing with herbs and things from the ground and different and things of that nature.
Is hoodoo also
washes.
a Louisiana version of the original African voodoo? Would that be a difference as well, or is
It's a
like, sorry?
it's a blend. So it's hoodoo is what came. It's what transpired from when slaves came over to America and they started adopting different things and blending it in. And so that's where you get it. It's a blend of everything. But if you, for example, if you talk to any pastor here in New Orleans and you say, well, what's hoodoo? They'll say that is the most dangerous, vicious form of magic that you can deal with. Because most people down here in New Orleans, they practice hoodoo. They don't, like, people think it's voodoo because voodoo is the marketable name, right? But it's really hoodoo that people down here practice more than anything. But voodoo is the name that's really marketed. You know what I'm saying? It's like voodoo fest, voodoo this, voodoo, but it's really hoodoo that people are practicing in their houses. So you'll see people go into a botanical store and buy, penis candles to cause their lover who was cheating on them to be infertile, right? But they'll take that penis candle and they'll go read a psalm of the Bible over that candle and light it, and it'll make that man infertile, right? They'll
Oh, I've never heard of the Bible being used for vicious magic. That's it. That's wow. That's so interesting. That's so interesting. Like you don't hear about that up here. You just don't. Like that's why I find it so interesting. I don't know if that's just a New Orleans thing or if that's like if that's where it got its roots and maybe it's spread around the world. But what are your thoughts? Like, do you think that's mostly down where you're at, or do you think that's all around the world?
No, that's what hoodoo is. That's what a lot of people use, and that's what a lot of hoodoo practitioners do. But this is the crazy thing, right? I have a lot of respect for anybody who has a spiritual practice. Like most people don't understand the knowledge that like a Wiccan or a witch or a hoodoo or a voodoo practitioner has. They are very knowledgeable about the spirit realm. And I tell people all the time, I'm in New Orleans. I know people who are voodoo practitioners, I go to their conventions, we'll sit down and talk and everything. And they're very, very knowledgeable. The one thing I don't understand is with that knowledge, they know what's going on. So let me walk you through something, right? So let's say I practice hoodoo, right? And I want to do that same penis candle spell, right? And I go get the Psalm of the Bible. I like that. I read that Psalm. I like that candle, which is petitioning the spirit to go to heaven and tell God, the God, Jehovah El Mishpat, the judge. They're going to tell God, hey, this person chose me to represent them and deal with their husband who was cheating on them and caused infertility. You sent that to God You sent an evil spirit to God to represent you in court. I don't know if people really understand what that means. I don't think they grasp. I know the average hoodoo, like in-home hoodoo practitioner, is not really grasping what they're doing. Now, the real deal, the ones that will have a tree fall on your house, oh, they know. Oh, they know. I know they know. I've spoken to some of them. But the average person who just wants power, they don't understand it. Because most people who practice things, they want power over an area of their life that they can't change. They know that there's a spiritual component to that change in their life. So they know, okay, if I haven't found the woman that I want because I'm not good enough and I don't have a good enough mouthpiece, so I don't look good enough, they know that there's a spiritual component that can fix that problem, right? They know without a doubt. So that's why you have, like, New Orleans is full of botanicals where you can go buy candles, buy this. They say, oh, I need more money, I'm gonna go buy a cash candle, right? And they're gonna take that cash candle, they're gonna read a psalm over it, and they're gonna get some money. But I don't think they completely understand what they're doing. And therein is the problem I see with people. Now, as far as I'm concerned, you make your own decisions, do whatever you want to do. That is your life. That's your life. That's your soul. That's your eternity, man. Handle it whatever, however you want to handle it. But nobody really discusses what actually happens. I don't know if because nobody has the balls to discuss it, or if it's because nobody knows, but nobody really talks about what happens when you do that. And so imagine me and you doing that, and we sent a spirit to God's court to petition God to actually do something on our behalf from an evil spirit. So we took God's word, perverted it, and used it in a perverted way. Bro, the consequences and repercussions of that are monumental. Monumental.
Yeah. So that's going to have some kind of karmic effect in the long run is what you're saying.
Nah, ain't no karmic effect. That's what damns you to hell. Ain't no karmic effect. The karma is, no, you made a decision. Now, you may be ignorant of that decision, but the law is the law. You know what I'm saying? The reason why the hexes work is because it's the law, right? The law is the law. So just like that hexer can use the law to hex you, just like you can use the law to defend you from somebody hexing you, the law is the law. It's like me and you. Let's say you and I ride down the street and we didn't know the speed limit was 75 miles an hour. We were on the highway, right? A few seconds ago, it was 75. It just changed. We went through a construction zone. We didn't notice the speed limit dropped to 55, right? Police pull us over. Well, man, you was doing 75 and a 55. Man, I didn't know. We ain't getting out that ticket. He writing us that ticket, right? That's how it works. That's how it works.
That's pretty amazing. Like you never hear about like that is in the real world, like as far as like what the inner goings of magic. And I wanted to ask you this: what about people who summon like the voodoo spirits? Like, for example, like I had a friend who he was real interested in voodoo one time, and he was telling me about that, that people summon like Papa Legba. And I'm sure you've heard of him living where you are. Like that's in that kind of lore, in voodoo lore, there's a character, one of the spirits named Papa Legba, and he'll come, and if you leave him out something, or I don't know what exactly you have to do. I didn't look into it enough, but you can do things where he will come and he will perform tasks for you, like, right? Like, or the things, he'll grant you certain things. Now, does he petition? How does that work?
Papa Legba. I'll tell you a story about that to make a point to you. This happened in Oklahoma last month. This guy's a close friend of mine. He comes, he's leaving work. And this girl comes in. It's right about the time he's about to get off work. This girl comes in and says, "Hey, I want to hang out with you. Can we hang out?" He says, "Sure." But he says, "Where do you want to go?" She's like, "Well, I just want to go somewhere private." He says, No, I'm not doing that. I tell you what, I got to wash clothes. Come with me to the washateria and let's hang out and talk. So they go to the washateria and they go to hang out and talk. Get through washing and folding the clothes. She helps him fold all the clothes. And then he says, "Well, look, I'm going to drop you off at home and, we'll catch up later." So they're driving home and she says, "Well, I don't want to go home." And he says, "Well, why don't you want to go home?" She says, "Well, I don't want to go home because I don't want to be in that house." So why don't you want to be in the house? At this point in time, they pulling up to the apartment complex. This guy has a gift from God where he can discern spirits on people. And he says, what's inside that apartment? And he points out her apartment. He points to the door. What's in that apartment? And she says, how do you know which room what door is mine? He says, what's in that apartment? She says, well, I don't want to go in there. And then all of a sudden she says, I got to stop talking to you because this is going to cause major problems. So he says, no, that's not how this is going to work. You're going to tell me what's going on. She tells him that her boyfriend works for Papa Legba. And so she says, well, you know, every morning he wakes up and he drinks coffee with Papa Legba and he leaves him tobacco. And some days he smokes cigars with Papa Legba and drinks coffee. And so my friend is sitting there. He says, oh, really? So, yeah. He says, so why did you come to me tonight? He asked the girl, he said, why did you come to me tonight? She said, I don't know. Something told me to come and hang out with you. He says, why do you think you came there? He already knows. I already knew when he was telling me the story. He says, why do you think you came to me? She says, maybe I need help. He says, well, I'll pray for you. So he starts to pray with the girl. And she says, well, you could pray for me, but I'm not going to pray with you because it's going to cause too many problems. Then in the middle of him praying, she says, my boyfriend's on the way home. And he says, I know. And he's mad. And he tells her, he said, listen, if you want out of that apartment, you're going to have to get him out of there because he works for Papa Legba. So therefore he has control over you. Well, he lets her go up into the apartment. 20 minutes later, he hadn't even made it home. She calls him, and these are his exact words. He says, who has been in this apartment? And she says, nobody's been in here. He tells the girl again, who has been in here? She says, nobody's been here. Then he says, whose spirit came in here? And she gets quiet. And so she's telling him this over the phone because she's stepped away from her boyfriend. And she's like, I don't know what to do. He's threatening to beat me and do this and this and this and this. And he was like, look, either you're going to leave that situation or you're going to stay in that situation. But that's a choice that you're making. And so the guy ends up beating the girl up that night and all the rest of this crazy stuff. Now, here's the crazy thing. During that conversation in the car before he prayed for her, she told him that the guy had multiple girlfriends, like 6 girlfriends around the area, right? And that the guy had set up 6 altars in 6 different places around the area to Papa Legba. This brings me to my next point of true spiritual warfare. And most people don't understand this. True spiritual warfare happens when an altar of God can be a person, it can be a church, it can be a business. If I had a car washing business that was dedicated to Jesus Christ, and my car, so my van that I wash cars out of, like Details, is dedicated to Jesus Christ. And I drive up into that parking lot of that place where Papa Legba, that the same apartment complex where that altar of Papa Legba is, there's angels coming out of my van. There's Papa Legba's spirit and his spirit's coming out of that apartment. That's what true spiritual warfare is. And people don't understand that because they've never studied it. If you go back and you look in the Bible, they talk about Jacob's ladder. When Jacob fell asleep in the desert and he had a dream about a ladder, and he saw a ladder with angels going up and down. Where he fell asleep at was an altar. That altar was a place where angels came through a portal to function in this realm. Remember, I said spirits got to work through people, right? Angels work with people. So this is a place where angels was coming through. And so true spiritual warfare. Hold on, somebody's doing something. How many people in your chat right now?
I didn't even look. Let me see. There's 6 people watching right now. Not a lot. There's like
somebody's doing something. All right. Whoever's doing that, go ahead and stop, because I'm not here to offend or hurt or harm anybody, but somebody's doing something. Anyway, true spiritual warfare is where it happens when those altars collide. So, for example, I'll give you a perfect example of it. If you were to come here to New Orleans and hang out with me, and I lit a cigar and took you and put you in my car, and we really rode around real New Orleans, not downtown, not Bourbon Street, we went to the hood, you would see a liquor store, you would see a church, then you would see a CBD or marijuana distributor store dispensary, and then you will see a church. You would see a strip club around the corner from a church. So what true spiritual warfare is when those two different altars are in direct competition for souls in that area. And so that's what real spiritual warfare is. People think that spiritual warfare is just praying. That's an aspect of it, but there's another aspect of it that's about territory. And because all spirits have to work through a person, the people are the actual territory. So you and I, brother, are territory. Because if
the spirits are secretly fighting through us, like even wars, like you could take it to a political level, right? Like wars are probably fought spirits. I mean, spirit, like our physical wars that are fought on this planet, are those spirits making those leaders go to war and stuff like that?
I would dare to say yes.
Yeah,
I would dare to say yes.
Usually
So
that shit's so evil, right?
think about it. Think about it. So if every spirit has to work through a person, right? And something needs to be done, it's whoever has the most people working with them pretty much wins the battle. I'll give you a perfect example. We went through the whole virus phase. I don't want to get you flagged, so I'm just going to say the virus phase, right? What was the one thing that got shut down during that whole virus phase? The one spiritual aspect thing that got shut down from what got shut down?
You couldn't go into a church.
You couldn't go to a church. You couldn't go to a synagogue. You couldn't go to a mosque. You couldn't go to any of those, right? But where could you go? You could go to Walmart and buy liquor. You can go to a liquor store. Bro, I knew strip clubs that was open when churches was closed. So when you start talking about spiritual warfare, one set of altars are closed, the other set of altars are open, where people can go out and do things. And then people wonder why things went downhill after that virus hit. They wonder why. Well, why did things get bad? Why did crime get bad? Why did this get bad? Bro, you had a certain set of altars. Things got out of balance, so far out of balance it had to be for what, a year and a half?
Yeah. So, but there was one set of things ruling where people didn't have the regular outlets to go to to pray or even practice spirituality in any kind of way. Like, so that does make a lot of sense. Like, I never really thought of that. Like that makes a lot of sense.
Let's go a little bit deeper. Watch this. There was a pastor in Louisiana. They tried to arrest for having church. There was Pastor Rodney something in Florida that they tried to arrest for having church. There was a pastor in Canada that they arrested, sent a SWAT team to his church to shut them down, and they were having church in the parking lot. Ask yourself a question. Why in the world would you arrest a pastor? What would motivate somebody in city government or state government to arrest a pastor? What motivates a person to do that? Really think about it. What motivates a person to do that? Never in my lifetime would I imagine that somebody would say, okay, I'm going to arrest a preacher for having church. Yeah. How far did the scales tip that you got to that point? And see, people saw it happening, but they didn't understand it. They really didn't. And that's what it is, bro. That's what true spiritual warfare is. You know what I'm saying? I'll tell you another story. So these are some of the things that I've come to conclusions about learning from the stories that I get from real people. There's this guy and his wife came down to New Orleans, right? They come down here, hang out on Bourbon Street. His wife gets drunk. Then they go to the Final Call. Nope. That's not the name. Porter Call is the name of the restaurant. They go to Porter Call and get the Huma Huma. It's a huge drink, bro. Drink so big, you got to hold it in two hands. Wife gets sloppy drunk. Can't barely walk. Takes her back to the Airbnb that they're staying in, right? They're hanging out in the Airbnb. She passes out, goes to sleep in the bed. He was horny. It's vacation. He thinking he about to slap cheeks with his wife because we on vacation, right? Gets angry. She goes to bed. He's staying up all night, finally falls asleep, wakes up to his wife moaning like somebody's having sex with him. Hops up, turns on the light, sees this black mass, like black smoky mass leaving from like by his wife's leg, which is exposed out the cover, and going back into this grate in the floor. Because in New Orleans, we used to have these floor fans instead of air conditioners. They had these gigantic fans that they put in the floor, and it would suck cool air in from the ground and pump it into the house, right? So he sees this, freaks completely out, tells me, he's like, yo, James, this freaked me out. I didn't know what the hell was going on. Stays up all freaking night. Next morning, his wife wakes up, she take her to brunch, and she says, well, baby, why were you having sex with me last night while I was drunk? He says, I didn't have sex with you, right? And so we're talking, and he says, man, you know, why did that happen? I said, I could tell you why. I said, but you're going to be embarrassed. And he says, well, tell me. I said, I got to ask you a personal question. I said, what kind of sexual practice do you and your wife have when you guys are at home? He said, man, that's too personal. I said, well, you want the answer to your question? And so he says, well, you know, we every now and then we use sex toys. We do this, we do that. Oh, okay, that's cool. I said, yeah, man, you're human. People do that. I said, but tell me about your house. Tell me about what's going on. Do you guys go to church? He said, yeah, you know, I go to church all the time. You know, blah, 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 I pray in my house. I said, okay. I said, so when you came to New Orleans, did you pray? He said, no, man, she was too drunk. Da, da, da. I said, let me tell you what happened. I said, you and your wife's behavior sent the signal out that to spirits that, okay, no, we like to do this type of sex, right? I said, you come to New Orleans, a spirit that's ruled by those kind of things, and you just so happen to go into a house that had one. And I said, it took advantage of what was there, and it had sex with your wife. He's like, that can't be possible. That's not how that happened. Blah, 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 blah. I said, bro, that's what it is. I said, if you don't believe me, take it back there again. It's going to happen again. Well, how do I fix it? I said, bro, I'm going to be real with you. Just apologize to God, repent, and ask it not to happen again. He says, man, it's that easy. I said, yeah, it's that easy. I said, but you're going to have to stop doing that if you don't want to open the door to it. And people have heard about this, spiritual spouses, you know, spiritual husbands, spiritual wives. And finally, he started reading about it. And then he called me back and he says, Dark, I want to tell you something. Bro, this happened years ago. He says, bro, I want to tell you something, man. Thank you. He said, because I didn't know what we were doing. I said, I know you didn't know, bro. I said, most people don't know. They don't understand. If they understood the things that they were doing, they wouldn't do them. But they just don't understand it, bro. So since they don't understand, they just living life, having fun. They don't understand the spiritual consequences of what they do. And therein lies the problem, bro. When we start talking about like demonic spirits and evil spirits and things of that nature, they have one objective, bro. And it's crazy. That's to steal, kill, and destroy. And anybody who's saying, oh, he don't know what he's talking about, open the Bible. I think it's 1 Peter 5:8. And then open the Bible to John 10:10. It explains to you exactly what it is. And in his case, I told him, I said, bro, so why did it happen? What was the objective of that? You know, because now I've gotten to the point where I've been in the paranormal field for so long. When I talk to people, I really want to know why it's happening and what was the purpose of it happening. I'm beyond the scary story, but this is how come my stories are so good, because I know why it happened. And then I can tell you why it happened without telling you, right? And why did it happen? Because think about it. God made marriage for a man and woman so they could have sex and not fornicate, right? And not break his law. So marriage is a gift from God between woman and man. Okay, so if there's a spirit that fell or hates God and it has an opportunity to go steal a gift from God, what does it do? It goes and takes that. And you silly enough or ignorant enough or evil enough. Some people are ignorant. They don't know what they're doing. Some people kind of know what they're doing. They're just being silly. Some people just evil, but you evil enough, one of those three options, to allow it to happen, and boom, it happens. And so you'll talk to people in the paranormal community, all over the paranormal community. There's people who, when they go to bed at night, you know, they have nasty dreams, feel like stuff is touching them. There's women who have orgasms at night in the bed, don't know why. There's men who go to bed at night and wake up having wet dreams. Like, man, why am I having wet dreams? They don't understand these are the things that are going on. I know this because I've talked to those people. You know what I'm saying? So you get to understand these things.
Is that the same thing as an incubus and a succubus? Like
exactly. Yep. But we call them, but see, we talk, oh, that person has an incubus. They had a succubus. No, that's a spiritual husband or a spiritual wife. Why is that incubus or succubus? Why do they have the right to even do that to you? For example, let's talk about pornography real quick. We talk about real spiritual warfare, real adult things, right? Let's talk about pornography. This is what happens to people when they look at pornography. And it happened to me. And I was like, God, you got to help me with this. This don't make no sense. You start off, let's say, in my case, I like lipstick lesbians, right? I'm watching me some lipstick lesbians. Oh, they so, boy, I love this, right? This next thing you know, you done went to something worse. Next thing you know, you done went to something worse. And then you get to the point you're like, man, what the hell am I looking at? Right? This is crazy. You don't understand what you're doing. You sitting there allowing a spirit to take you down a rabbit hole and trying to get you to a point to where you're completely and totally corrupted. That's why you don't need to look at pornography. You know what I'm saying? There was a friend of mine. This was 3 years ago. Married, happy marriage, started looking at pornography. And then he started feeling real insecure about himself, started having infertility. And he was like, man, bro, you know, my junk won't work. I said, well, what you been doing, homie? We sitting there smoking cigars, da, da, da. He just talking, you know, I take these pills, it's still not working. I'm doing this, it's not working. I'm like, well, what you been doing? Man, you know, I'll be looking at that porn. I said, oh, okay. So you being infertile now, right? It's like, yeah. I said, why don't you turn the porn off and apologize looking at the porn? Because whatever you're watching is making you infertile, because it's lead you in a direction to where you want a certain thing. And I said, bro, I'm going to be real with you. I said, it's not that you're infertile. It's just it takes something more extreme to turn you on now. I said, so it started off with you like lipstick lesbians and that turns you on. But that ain't good enough. Now it's something stupid that turns you on, right? He's like, yeah, bro, it's ridiculous. I'm embarrassed to talk about it. I said, yeah, because you went down that road. So now you're at a point where it's something that's almost demeaning that turns you on. He was like, yeah, bro, that's what it is. I said, okay. So guess what? You need to go apologize, bro, and get that together. A month later, we hanging out again. And he's like, man, I got all my inches working again, dog. Thank you. Every inch is working the way it's supposed to. We just laughing and joking. He's like, thank you. But people don't understand these things. This is true spiritual warfare. It's most people think it's praying because something's touching you in the bed at night. Yeah, you need to pray, but you need to know why it can touch you. You need to go fix the reason why it can touch you. You know what I'm saying? I'll tell you something about me, and we'll talk about the spirit of fear. When I first started doing the whole dark waters thing, and I call it the dark waters thing because my real name is James Williams. I was living in a house on 2706 Robert Street. I have this spell, Rob, where I can't sleep because there's literally something when I close my eyes, it's like something grabs my spine and pricks it. Like it's like a guitar string going up and down my spine. I'm scared to sleep with my back out the cover. I'm sleeping with my back against the headboard. I'm like, what the hell is going on? This is crazy, right? I didn't understand it for years and years. I talked to my girl Heather about it. Me and Heather real cool. I miss Heather. She was a good person. I talked to her about it. I talked to a whole bunch of people about it. And still nobody could explain it to me. Then one day, I'm sitting there reading my Bible. And this is after I did like all these deliverance prayers to get that stuff to stop, because it was crazy, bro. It was shadows walking around the house, all kind of ignorant stuff. And God tells me, do you want to know what was going on? I say, absolutely. He says, you were being turned over to a spirit of fear. I didn't give you a spirit of fear. I gave you a spirit of power, love, and a sound mind. The spirit of fear prohibits you from getting all my protection and everything else associated with me. And it's crazy, bro, because if you understand what it means, like most people don't get it. Psalms, I'm trying to think of them. Psalms 25, right? Psalms 33, I think 18, Psalms 43:7. One of them talks about the secret of the Lord is with those who fear him. The other one talks about, behold, the eye of the Lord is on those who fear him. Another one talks about the angel of the Lord encampeth around those who fear him. So if I'm so busy being afraid of whatever's spirit, the shadow man, the dog man, the Bigfoot, what am I giving up? Because I'm more afraid of that than I am of God. I'm giving up all his promises, all his protection. And bro, that's what happens to people. There was this video that came out with my man Blue down in Florida, his Dogman encounter, right? It was, I don't know if you've seen it. It's a Dogman runs across the yard and there's this big old pole and you see the Dogman run across the screen.
No, I haven't seen that yet. Is it real? I mean, would you say it's real?
Oh, that's 100% real, bro. That's 100% real. That whole neighborhood went under fear. So much so that they had extra police patrolling. People weren't going outside at night for like 3 months. The whole neighborhood went under fear. Blue himself was the only person who didn't give in to a spirit of fear. Because Blue was, and it wasn't because he was like the most godly, clean, unsinning person. It's just because Blue said, I never forget, we on the phone. He says, man, you know what? I'm not gonna worry about that. That's their little area over there. They're gonna do what they do. I'm gonna do what I do. But everybody else was scared to go outside at night, bro. This dude going to do what he need to do, handle his business. But he never had any problems with it attacking him. Now get this, 3 doors down, some other people, it came up and was literally scratching on their front door and looking through their window. So what's the difference between those two households? Blue wasn't afraid. They were afraid. And that literally was it. And if you go back and watch the video with Blue, it's on my YouTube channel. When he closes the door, he starts quoting scripture. He says, Psalm 23, yea, do I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I should fear no evil. Then he stops and he says, woo, am I seeing this? Did y'all see that? Da, 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 da. And he and I are talking. And I'm like, bro, you don't realize what you did. And I said, and I broke it down to him. And it took him like a year to admit it to me. I said, bro, you don't understand what you did. You had God's word in your heart. And when you were afraid, just unconsciously, you called on God and you were protected. And I said, you haven't had any problems? He's like, nah, bro. He said, I had it come look in the window one time, but he said, it never bothered me. And I said, but your neighbors, some of your neighbors had to come in, try and come in their house. He was like, yeah, the show did. So that's the true reality of spiritual warfare. Like another thing, my producer, right? Wes, you talk to Wes, you email Wes back and forth.
Yeah.
Wes is a good guy. For the longest, bro, Wes was having problems sleeping. Like he would go to sleep, he would have dreams that demons were attacking him, that monsters were trying to get him, clowns with knives, crazy stuff. I mean, just crazy stuff in his dreams. And finally, he started talking about it and he got some help. And he learned what was going on. And I told him, I said, Wes, here's what the deal is. I said, God promises you rest. He promises you 2 things, peace and rest, right? Jesus Christ is the Prince of Peace. And then in the Psalms, it talks about, I will rest in peace because my Lord makes me I will lie down and sleep because my Lord makes me rest in peace, right? And so I was like, Wes, when you're having bad dreams like that, which a lot of people in the paranormal field have, or community have, it's because something's attacking their peace, right? Peace of mind, so you can't sleep. But think about it, Rob. What are the side effects of sleep deprivation? They're very, very extensive. Heart disease, diabetes, cognitive issues where you can't remember things, poor decision making. I said weight loss. It's a lot of things that happen when you're sleep deprived.
Yeah.
So, and I told you, these things' objectives are to steal, kill, and destroy, right? So if it's affecting your sleep, it's affecting your body, and it's taking years off your life, and you're literally dying. So a way of killing you is affecting your sleep. So Wes had to do some things to get his sleep back in order. Now I'll call him, Wes, what you doing? How'd you sleep? Man, I slept like a rock. It was fantastic. I loved it. Thank you. Boom, a done deal. That's the true essence of spiritual warfare. That's what happens in spiritual warfare. And so when you hear these stories on my channel, what you are hearing is the art of spiritual warfare. You are literally hearing what's happening to people. That's spiritual warfare, whether it be somebody who had a Bigfoot sighting and they got afraid, somebody who saw a Bigfoot in their house, somebody who had a shadow man in their house, somebody who saw a monster, something with red eyes. Like just recently in Oklahoma, one of the biggest battles that I know that's going on. There's a neighborhood outside of Ardmore, Oklahoma, bro. Imagine a neighborhood with 12 houses on one street, and the entire neighborhood at night are seeing short black shadows with green eyes. The entire neighborhood.
Oh my God, that's insane! Like it's wow, you know, like yeah. I can't even imagine, like, you know, like
the entire freaking neighborhood, bro. So much so that one of the guys who used to live there, he talked about why he sold his house. He said, man, I sold my house because the land didn't like me. And there were things coming in my house at night with green eyes. But this is Native American land. And one of the significant things, remember we talked about dominion earlier, right?
Yeah.
One of the significant things that happened in Oklahoma that Joe Biden did, I'm not going to say nothing negative because people get all up in their arms about politics, but I will say I don't have nothing positive to say. One of the things that he did was they turned the territories of Oklahoma that were used to be controlled by the United States, the lands that were owned by the United States, they gave it back to the Native American tribes, right? So essentially, what you did was you gave that land back to the Native American tribes who have a different set of gods, and you gave dominion over that land to those spirits. But then you have people who live on that land. So there's people who've been living in houses that have never had any kind of negative activity. But over the past 12 months, they had all kind of negative activity, bro. You see what I'm saying? So that's what true spiritual warfare is, my brother.
Wow, that's interesting. That's so interesting. Like it really is it's really like a battle for the soul, right? I mean, to conclude everything up, I guess it's a battle for the soul in the end.
Yes, it's a battle for the soul. And it's a battle for the soul, and it's a battle for people, for spirits to work through in order to affect other people. You remember the movie The Matrix, right?
Yeah.
Agent Smith. Remember how when Agent Smith needed to, they were going after Neo, and Neo would be like riding on the highway and they're fighting, boom, 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 and he'll get away, and then Agent Smith will hop into another body of somebody driving a truck and then ram the truck into him. Agent Smith is a pure example of, um, like, if you look at it the right way, you see a spirit taking over territory needed to accomplish a goal. So Neo got away. You ain't getting away. I got somebody over here I can take over. Oh, you over here? I got somebody over here I can take over. And so it shows you what it means by what territory is as far as human beings being actual territory. And that's what we're dealing with when we deal with spiritual warfare. People don't talk about it like this, bro. I think because when you talk about things like this, you draw attention. I know I drew attention. I can feel it, but I ain't worried about it. You draw attention when you talk about things like this, because this is how people's souls get saved and their lives get changed, because they get this understanding. So, but it needs to be talked about.
I hope we change some people's thoughts on ideas. I know you changed my whole perspective on the way I look at like spiritual warfare now. Like it's interesting, like to think that spirits work through people. And let me ask you this as one more final thing, and this is the last thing I promise, like because I know you're very busy, but I just want to ask you: are the spirits working through humans because they miss what it's like to be human, or do they want to be human again too, or do they just want to destroy humanity?
Some of them are working through humans because they miss what it is to be human, but their overall objective and goal is to destroy humanity. That's just their objective and goal. And if, just for the record, because somebody will say, well, Dark Waters doesn't know what he's talking about, right? Just for the record, if you go look at the story of Jesus in the Demon of the Gadarenes, where Jesus confronted Legion, there was a man in a cave. He was chained down. They said he was breaking all of his chains, and he would take rocks and he would cut himself and cut his body. And when Jesus walked up, they knew who Jesus was. And they said, have you come here to torture us before our time? If you really read that story closely and listen to what those demons said, they said, cast us out into the swine. Don't just cast us out into the swine. That's a very significant thing. They petitioned Jesus, who's God walking on earth, to cast them in the swine. What did they know, and what were they saying, and what did it mean? It meant that if there was a person in the vicinity that they could have just hopped out and ran into, they would have hopped out and ran into that person, right? Oh, I'm gonna leave out of this man, I'm gonna go in this man over here. So the real question is, the man that was in that cave, how long had they been maneuvering him in position to where they could possess him? What had he been doing? What kind of practices had he had in his life to where he could be possessed by those things? And that's the key that people need to understand. Your behaviors open doors for things like that to happen. And so if you monitor your behaviors, going back to the whole thing about alcoholism and theft that we talked about earlier, if you monitor your behaviors, you can prevent a lot of this stuff, but most people don't know to prevent it. But they chose to go in pigs. The reason why they wanted to go in those pigs, I believe, is because they had a territory they was over, and they didn't want him just to throw them all the way to the other side of the earth because he could have said, let's go in these pigs, right? And then the pigs ran off the cliff and died. So with that being said, bro, I mean, that's real talk on spiritual warfare combined with stories. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that was cool. If you want to tell everybody where they can find your YouTube, where they can find your website, all that stuff. And thank you, by the way. I appreciate it. This was an interesting, very interesting show. Thank you so much.
No, you're more than welcome. I am darkwaters.com is my website. Dogman is one of my websites. Paranormal Outlaws. Dark Waters Radio is a radio station, and you can find me on YouTube under Dark Waters. Just type in Dark Waters channel, pop up on YouTube. A whole bunch of stories, and I want people to understand. Like people, for years, bro, I've been accused of, oh, you make these stories up, bro. My stories are real, and it's real stories from real people who've had like these crazy, horrific encounters. And the reason why the content is so good is because these elements are what I lay out on the table. I don't always talk about them in depth, but I lay out all the evidence on the table for you. You know what I'm saying? It's all right there in front of you. If you understand what you're listening to, you'd be like, whoa, this dude is really breaking it down. Now that I'm telling people this, there's some people going to go back and listen and be like, holy crap, he told us all this stuff without telling it to us. But now it's time where I got to start telling people. So I'm happy that you had me on to do this interview and talk about it, man. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate it. And I have to do it again sometime. Thank you.
Anytime you want, bro. That's what I love to do. I love talking to people, man. Anytime.
All right.